All right, Bryan Smith. Now we can get to our regularly scheduled topic. So Bryan and I, well, we talk all the time, but we were talking last week about getting Bryan on the show. And the topic of conversation was going to be I just wanted to get his opinion on some things. And so what we're going to do for these next couple topics, we are originally going to talk about, Notre Dame closing the gap, how he sees this, how he feels that Notre Dame, where they are compared to some of those other top teams. We were going to talk recruiting also. But what we're going to do is we're going to move that back to another time because of the Angeli news breaking. We're going to have Bryan back on in the next week or two, and we'll talk more about the recruiting aspects of it then, and we'll have a little bit more knowledge of where a couple things stand. But then I also wanted to get Bryan on to preview Miami, Notre Dame's first opponent. Bryan obviously has covered Miami. I know he's still very tied into the program. You still talk about it in your shows. And we want to do that. But before we start that, Bryan, what I wanted to give people a chance, I wanted to give you a chance to do is, so you were doing some stuff with Irish Breakdown. You were going to come on and you were going to be doing some recruiting stuff with us. And then an opportunity opened up for you that you absolutely needed to take full advantage of. And I wanted to give you a chance to let the folks know what you're doing now, because you have a couple different shows you're doing. So why don't you let people know where they can find you? Because I don't think everybody knows that you're doing some shows. So if you haven't checked it out, I'll be sitting there making dinner and I'll pop on one of Bryan's shows and listen to it. So definitely want to check it out. But let people know, Bryan, what you're doing now.
The Portal Podcast is my bread and butter now. It is about recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal. Needless to say, right now I am rather busy. As soon as I'm done with this podcast.
Understatement of the season.
Hayes Fawcett might be the only guy busier than me, but I don't know. It's debatable. Anyway, the show is on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I have free reign. I cover every team in the P4, so it's a little overwhelming. But that show, it just got started on 1st of February. I'd appreciate if you checked it out. The Locked On Podcast Network, again, gave me the shot to do it, and that's after I started Locked On Seminoles. I obviously covered Florida State. I lived in Florida a long time, and that program is very hard to cover right now for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But I technically do cover Florida State as well. Locked On Seminoles is fun, but it'll be more fun if they don't win 2 games next year.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And Bryan still does contribute to the premium board at boards.ourspring.com.
Oh, yeah.
He'll put some thoughts and some recruiting intel on there. Because at the end of the day, Bryan, you are still at the heart a Notre Dame fan. So,
yeah.
So that's where you can find Bryan. So, Bryan, what I wanted to kind of get you on the show is talking about where Notre Dame currently stacks up. Got somebody in the chat saying that they dislike the closing the gap comment because the gap is closed. The gap's not closed till they win a title again. That's when the gap is closed. The gap is closed when they are the best team in the country. Until then, they still have room to grow. But I'm of the belief that Notre Dame has done more to close the gap in the last couple of years than others. But what I wanted to have you on today, Bryan, is I wanted us to have a little bit of a conversation about just how Notre Dame stacks up amongst the best teams in the country, what your evaluation is of the Notre Dame program, where it's at, where it's headed, all those type of things. So I think that's really where you and I are going to spend some time here and really dive into. And then we'll also talk about, where the areas that Notre Dame still can and should get better in order for them to go out there and not get to the title game only to lose, but to get to the title game and win it. And we have seen a lot of teams in the past get close, get knocked off, and then bounce back. I think back to, Alabama had to learn how to slay the dragon that was Florida. 2008, they couldn't get it done. They went undefeated, get beaten in the SEC title game, then lose to Utah. Next year, 2009, they bounce back. They go undefeated to win the title. You think of Clemson, 2015, getting to the title game, getting beat by Alabama, rallying, getting back the next year. Michigan, 2 years in a row, getting to the college football playoffs, getting beat the first in the semifinals both times, and then finally getting over the hump. Georgia could not slay that bat dragon that was Alabama. Lost to them in the national championship game in 2017, always lost to them in the regular season, lost to them in the SEC title game. In 2021, got beat 41-24. We're able to kind of get over the hump. So right now, Notre Dame is still that team that is trying to get over the hump and win that title. So what we're going to do, Bryan, is we're going to have a conversation about just kind of where Notre Dame is. And my first question for you is, has Notre Dame, in your view, has Notre Dame become an elite program, not championship program, but an elite program. When you look at the construction of their program, coaching, roster, to where now when Notre Dame goes out and plays, you may say, hey, I don't know if they can beat that team, but it's not, you're going to get overwhelmed. You just don't have the roster, that type of thing, where now you look at Notre Dame and say they are now one of those premier teams that everybody else has to worry about. What's your stance on that, Bryan? I have some opinions on that, but I wanted to start off and get your thoughts on this.
I think Notre Dame's roster balance makes them one of the 3 most stable programs in college football. Most people probably won't be surprised by my other 2 picks. That's Texas and Ohio State. I think Penn State, to some degree, Georgia. You could throw on a couple other teams possibly, but it's really slimmed down. Like, I don't know what to make of Alabama. The 3 Florida schools, none of them are in play. We think Clemson's going to be that team this year, but are they deep enough? Heard some problems about their secondary. Like, name teams. You brought this up earlier in the show. How many teams have 3 guys that could start for you at quarterback? I don't think anybody was besides Notre Dame. So they have more depth at quarterback, which is weird because they've been doing portal. It's so weird how that ended up being the case, but they keep guys. Notre Dame is the best elite program at retention. That's probably the most important thing. Texas does a pretty good job. Ohio State does a pretty good job, but I think Notre Dame is the best. Penn State would be up there. And those teams are the reasons, those are the reasons those teams are like at the very top of the preseason rankings and why everybody thinks year to year now they're going to win. They build through the high school ranks. They find a few guys here and there in the portal to kind of plug and play. And that's it. Notre Dame's the catalyst of that. Do they have Arch Manning? I don't know. I think CJ's just as good. They're different players. But Notre Dame, to me, is about as stable a program as you can get. But your point is still correct. Until you actually have a ring, it's not gap closing because having the talent's one thing. Using it to win is the secondary point. That never changed.
Right. And I don't know that you can watch the Ohio State game and say they have the same exact roster as Ohio State. Now, Ohio State's got a different roster this year than they had last year. They lost a lot of guys. But again, until you get to that point, you are still growing. You're still building as a team. And the thing that I think is different about this team, Bryan, is 2012, there were parts of that team that were as good as anybody. I've made the case that in 2012, I'll stack Notre Dame's 5 best players up against Alabama's 5 best players and say, I can play with you. And you think about Zach Martin, Tyler Eifert, Stephon Tuitt, Manti Te'o, whether you want to view Lewis Nix or Capron Lewis Moore. Like, I'll take that 5 and say I'll stack them up against anybody that Bama had. The difference was 6 through 30. There was a big difference. I think the biggest thing that has changed about Notre Dame now is, if anything, you could argue that maybe they don't have as much of their top 5 is as good as everybody else's top 5, but their 6 through 30 is as good, in my opinion, as any team in the country. I think that's been the biggest thing that Marcus Freeman has changed, is just not many teams, including teams that have won titles, I think could have sustained the devastating left tackle, center, left guard or right guard, starting Viper, backup Viper who's even more talented, All-American D tackle, All-American corner. All of those guys are gone with the exception of your All-American D tackle by the 6th game of the year. And then, of course, you lose Riley Mills in the first round of the playoffs. And then the guy who was your key D tackle reserve, who was playing as good as your starters, is gone for the year in week 6 as well, and Jason Onye. There aren't many teams, Bryan, that can sustain that many injuries and still go play for the title in a 4-game playoff where they got to play 4 games. You don't do that unless you are incredibly deep. Depth of talent is something you and I have talked about for a long time. Notre Dame has not had the depth of talent. That, to me, is the biggest difference. And you can't do that if you can't retain your depth players, which is something that you talked about. And I think that's what's killing Georgia right now.
100%. I think that for those that don't know, I live in the South and I cover the state of Florida, Alabama, and Georgia primarily. Like, when I met Damon Wilson, when he was coming out of Venice High School in Florida, one of the nicest kids you'd ever meet. But when you shook his hand, you knew that was a grown man. He benched 420 pounds, and he was an edge rusher. He was 230-something. He goes to Georgia. He played there 2 years. He was going to be their main guy. He just took off and went to Missouri. That kind of stuff doesn't really happen at Notre Dame as a general rule. And don't get me wrong, Georgia's still going to be good.
When you have the Humphrey kid gets benched during the year and then just leaves, quits the team.
That's what I mean. Like, it's really sad, and I hope I'm wrong on this, but there are only about 5 or 6 programs that aren't mercenary programs, whether they want to be or not, at least in some capacity. Notre Dame will take a kid that's a one-hit wonder for a year. Like, they just brought in a nickel from Bama, but he wanted to be back closer to family, so he had different reasons. And he got his degree at Bama. I don't think that's a big deal. But like Georgia, they're taking kids they got to pay over $1 million for out of high school ranks. They're just taking the money just to get. There are a few of those. I don't think Notre Dame's going to win with that kind of kid. And they're better off winning with juniors, seniors, and fifth-year seniors. Now, they may not have as many guys on NFL draft day go in the first 2 rounds. But to Bryan's point, rounds 3 through 7, Notre Dame might be the most going forward as long as Marcus is there. They got a lot of guys that are kind of fringe elite players, and it's across the board. That's the difference. Like they send guys in waves. Like I'm nothing against it, but like Tuli Alamaka is not as good as Boubacar Traore.
No,
physically he's not.
No,
but he played. Ask the Georgia quarterback who got smacked, and ask there's a bunch of guys like several of Notre Dame's backups defensively just caused chaos.
Yeah, it was him and RJ Oben made those big plays in that game.
Yeah, and it's just like in the second half. I mean, they made some adjustments. The quarterback came out pretty decent, but when Notre Dame made a few adjustments, got a little more pressure on that offensive line, that game's over.
Right.
They couldn't move the ball. Early they did, but they fell off. That's because Notre Dame's depth. This was the first year they could do that up front and go in waves. But like, I didn't think they were going to beat Ohio State anyway, but when they lost Riley Mills and stuff, everything comes to an end. Eventually, you can't lose elite guys. Like out of their top 10 guys.
Right.
It's just, it was like, really?
Yeah.
Like, what, 6 out of their top 10 guys?
You could argue 3 of their 4 best pass rushers they lost.
Yeah,
I mean, with Batelho and Boubacar and then Riley Mills. And then you lost your best cover guy in Benjamin Morrison. And it's hard to beat a team that's as loaded as Ohio State. Now, Ohio State had their own share of injuries on the offensive line, but they not like what Notre Dame went through. I'm not saying that they would have won anyway. I think they might have, but it's not something I'm going to sit here and argue with someone over. Here's what I think is different about Notre Dame moving forward, Bryan. I've made a comment, and I made it during last season, that what made this team different from past years is they did not have the depth is one, but I don't think that they had the same top 5 as past Notre Dame teams. Like you look at the 2015 team, and your top 5 is what? Jalen Smith, Quentin Nelson, Ronnie Stanley. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like elite, like just elite, best of the best, top 10. You had Mike McGlinchey. You know, you had some elite Will Fuller, exactly. CJ Procise. And then you look at 2012, Manti, Zach Martin, Tyler Eifert, Stephon Tuitt. I don't think this year's team's stars were on that level. If Riley Mills doesn't get hurt, he's still not Stephon Tuitt, with all due respect to him. As good as Drake Bowen and Jack Kaiser were, they're not Manti. Nobody on offense was Tyler Eifert. Nobody on the offensive line was Zach Martin. That depth was what made it. And their top guys were still pretty good. I mean, Xavier Watts was an elite player, but he wasn't, what I'm saying is he wasn't that elite Jalen Smith type of athlete. What I think is starting to change now, going into 2025, is you are now going to have more of that depth plus the elite talent because of the recruiting of Marcus Freeman and staff, that now you are seeing Jeremiah Love becoming an upperclassman. You do now have Leonard Moore. You do now have some of those elite young players that are now becoming the core of your team. And now you're in a situation where, I mean, Bryan, you and I have been doing this a long time. You're even older than I am. We're both old heads. We've been following this team since we were little kids. When was the last time Notre Dame went into a season where most of the nation, not what we Notre Dame fans thought, but where most of the nation felt that Notre Dame had the best running back and the best cornerback coming back in college football?
It's never happened in my life.
I mean, did anybody think that Tom Carter was the best corner going into 92? Yeah, Jerome Bettis.
They would have been in the conversation, but Bettis, he had like 20-some touchdowns a year before. Probably him, but I don't think Tomlin's the best corner coming in the next year. He'd been up there.
Mm-hmm.
You
But
could have
that's
made the
how long
argument.
you could even say it's even possible that was even the conversation.
Yeah.
That was 1992 in the prime of the Lou Holtz era. And you go around and look at, I'm not talking about what we say, right? I'm talking about nationally speaking. There's a lot of people that will say Notre Dame has the best running back and the best cornerback coming back in college football next year.
Yeah, that's really unique. And more importantly, I forget who I was talking to, but Notre Dame's secondary overall, even though they just lost a guy that was National Defensive Player the year before, et cetera, they just had a guy jump in the portal at safety that's a pretty good player, but there was no place for him to play.
Full string. Yeah.
And I don't blame him. He'll go, I imagine he'll go to Arizona State or something like that.
USA.
And he'll play. I don't know where he's going, but he ain't going to play at Notre Dame this year. And Freeman's not going to lie to the kid. It's just going to be miserable and use up a roster spot. So it is what it is. Notre Dame's depth is ridiculous. So I don't know exactly what they're selling besides the degree, because I don't think that holds a lot of water anymore. I know a lot of fans don't want to hear that.
It does for kids that still pick Notre Dame.
For a lot of them.
That's what got Jeremiah Love here.
Yep.
That's what got Leonard Moore here. So I do think there are some players that still matters for. But it comes down to, Brian, what I think a big part of it is the fact that you can now sell, guys, we can play for championships here. You're going to come here and you're going to do this. And I think that you have a head coach that the players look at and say, him and his staff, they have my best intentions at heart. And I think there's parents that trust Marcus Freeman maybe more than you're going to see in other places. I think that helps. But I think this is why it's so important to have a head coach that can recruit, that wants to recruit, that understands the value of recruiting. Because, Brian, Notre Dame could have got guys like this all the time. Yeah. And we've seen this over the years. When you have a good recruiter, it's like Tony Alford does a great job recruiting at Notre Dame. Gets talented backs all the time. And then all of a sudden he leaves, and all of a sudden you're struggling at recruiting running backs. And then all of a sudden you hear the excuse making. Well, top running backs don't want to come to Notre Dame. They don't care about going to class. They don't care. And then all of a sudden that running back's coach leaves. Lance Taylor shows up, and all of a sudden you get Chris Tyree one year, you get Logan Diggs and Aldrich Estime the next year, then Dylan McCullough comes in, you get Jadarian Price, you get Jeremiah Love, you get Keidron Young, you get Aeneas Williams, you get Nolan James, Jawan Sider comes in. You're now in a great position with guys like Javion Osborne and DeZephan Walker and Jonas Walton, and all of a sudden, miraculously, top running backs want to come to Notre Dame. It's like, wow, who knew, Brian? It's almost like having dynamic recruiters or people that value recruiting that can sell your institution actually has an impact on what you can do. And I think, why did top DBs just miraculously decide they cared about academics? Or maybe having a guy like Mike Mickens at that position has a pretty big impact. And then now that he was able to go out and find a Benjamin Morrison, then you have that on-field success. Now these 2026 corners and 2027 corners are like, dude, I can go play at Notre Dame. I can still get a degree, but more importantly, I'm going to get a chance to play elite football, be coached up by elite coaches, and get drafted high. Because my thing, Brian, is there's a lot of kids who value education, but at the end of the day, their chosen major is still football. That doesn't mean they don't care about, like, Christian Wilkins got 2 degrees at Clemson. His chosen major is still football. What do I mean by that? Your major is what you want to do vocationally after you get done with college. That's what you pick a major for. You don't major in engineering because you want to be a doctor. You major in engineering because here's a crazy thought, you want to be an engineer. So if your desire is still to be a professional football player, no matter how much you may value the education and the academic piece, you're going to find a school that has a good education program, but one that's going to put you in the highest possible echelon of the next level, and that where you can compete for championships. So you get a coach that can prove he can do that, and all of a sudden, year after year after year, you're landing big-time DBs. It's not a coincidence. And that's what's changed at Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman and the recruiting operation is you're now getting more of those players. Some of them were big-time recruits. Some of them weren't. But you're getting elite talent. And at the end of the day, Brian, I don't care how deep you are, you're not going to win the title without elite talent at the top.
Yeah, that's never going to change, especially at the critical spots. Offensive tackle, you don't necessarily have to have Joe Alt, but it doesn't hurt. You need to have guys that are draftable at tackle, corner, pass rusher, to some degree, defensive tackle, and then that position behind center is kind of important too. The new spot, and I don't even know how to label this, I just call it playmaker, but you got to have a receiver, whether it's your slot, your boundary, your flanker. That is a guy the other team has to take recognition of.
Or big time tight end like we saw with Georgia.
Yeah, like
but it's got to be big time tight end.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty rare. Like Georgia, Notre Dame, and Miami, those three schools, Iowa, there's been a handful like have dominated that. It's kind of weird,
Mm-hmm.
but if you've got one of those, that can be even worse because the size, you can run any package you want. You can come out in 12, but go empty.
Mm-hmm.
Then teams are in a that's not fun if you're a DB and you see a 6'4", 250-pound guy in the slot, but that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, Notre Dame's just deeper than they used to be. And on top of it, at the critical spots, like they've always sucked at corner. They'll have one guy that's elite and then you'll just throw to the other side. They've had that happen forever. Now they've got more guys and they got like Carson Hobbs. I liked what I saw. I know it's just one appearance.
He looked, that was what you saw in the blue gold game is what we saw in practices as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, that is not the same guy I saw in high school. I questioned whether he was going to play corner at Notre Dame. Like, I don't know if he's got enough speed. We'll see what he does, but Mickens is really good at evaluating. He'll figure something out. If he played corner, I thought he wouldn't be to his third or fourth year. As a redshirt freshman, he'd probably start at 90% of the schools in college football. There's no way he's starting this year with Christian Gray on one side, and Leonard Moore's pretty good too. So I just think it's ironic. Notre Dame has the best secondary now. Traditionally, that's their weakest spot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still questioning defensive tackle to a certain degree because they don't have a first or second round pick.
They're winning off of depth on the D-line right now with this upcoming season. Do they have difference makers? That's still an area where that's one of those closing the gap areas. And we'll get to that. But like Bryan, you and I did a show it's about 3 years ago where you went back and looked at like the previous 10 like playoff teams and national champions. And what you pointed out is I think all of them had at least one, I think it was like a first or second round draft pick at corner.
Yeah, that was the year Washington was in the playoff. Yeah. They got smoked by Bama, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it and say that was a position, as you mentioned, that we've said for years, you'll have the occasional this cropped up, like you go back to some of the anomalies. 02 with Vontez and Shane Walton were really good players. You look at 18 with Julian Love and Troy Pride. There's been the occasional, well, it worked. It was good that year. But by and large, you're not, I mean, you think about in 2012, Notre Dame starting secondary after Jamor Slaughter got hurt. Because I think Jamor Slaughter would have been different if Jamor's would have stayed because Jamor's was a legit NFL talent. But your starting secondary against Alabama was true freshman Kavari Russell, who you recruited to play running back. Bennett Jackson, who you moved from receiver after he played 2 years of receiver. Zeke Mata, who right now in 2025 would be a linebacker. And Matthias Farley, who you recruited to play receiver and played freshman as a receiver. Like that was your starting secondary going into the national championship game against Alabama. And now you look at where Notre Dame is, where you lose a guy like Xavier Watts and you've got a 6'5", 210-pound true freshman stud, a 6'4", 215-pound, really rangy athletic kid in Luke Talich, a 6'3", 295-pound redshirt freshman who was a top 100 recruit in Bronte Johnson. Those are now the guys battling for the starting job opposite of Don Schuler, who a year ago was your tallest safety. Now he's at least 3 inches shorter than everybody else at the position. And like that's the difference between then and now is a guy like Carson Hobbs is starting for Notre Dame in 2012. It just is. Sophomore version of Carson Hobbs starts at Notre Dame in 2012.
Yeah, where do you think he is? How far down would you say, just in order, is Hobbs as a corner?
He's their third right now. Yeah, he's their third. Like he's the next guy. He is where Leonard Moore was a year ago. Leonard Moore last year was if Christian gets hurt, Leonard goes in, which we saw against Louisville. Christian was hurt. Leonard steps in and starts at field corner opposite Benjamin Morrison. Then Benjamin goes down. They move Leonard over to the boundary so he could kind of do both. Carson's got sort of the speed and the tackling ability to play the field, which requires more range, but he also has the strength and the man coverage potential. He's not quite as good there yet, but he's getting there. He's very close to that, and this spring was huge for that, where you probably put him in no matter who goes down. which is obviously where you're going to be. Now, that may change when Dallas and Mark Zachary show up and Creed Thomas now has 15 practices under his belt. That may change in the fall, but that's where Carson was now. And it wasn't that long ago that a guy like Dallas Golden or Mark Zachary is coming in as a freshman, and you're probably like, he's probably going to start at some point in time this season. Now you're just like, they may not even be in the 2 deep because Creed got a 15 practice head start on him. One of those two will not be in the 2 deep this year. It's that we haven't seen that, Bryan, since the early 90s. That's the last time that you could look and say Notre Dame had NFL guys in the secondary everywhere. I mean, I pointed this out. Was it 92 where Notre Dame had draft picks in the 2 deep, like not guys that were in the 2 deep that eventually became starters. I'm talking about back in the early 90s, Notre Dame would have guys who didn't start get drafted from their secondary.
Willie Clark played running back about half his career at Notre Dame, but he started games for the Chargers at corner.
Right. It was picked in what, round 5?
Something I don't remember, but he was just electric fast. Like he was insanely fast, and they figured it out, or else he wouldn't have got drafted. So yeah, he didn't start part of his career when he was in the secondary. They just didn't have enough spots. I mean, they had Bobby Taylor and Tom Carter. That kind of helped. This Jeff Burris guy was good. But.
Right. He was pretty decent. Was that 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick? And I think the reason Bobby Taylor was a second-round pick was really because people just didn't know where to play him.
Well, he didn't have the greatest attitude either.
That's also true.
But he ended up probably having the best pro career.
Those 3, yes. Yeah, he had the best.
6'2.5" corners.
I say Burris was second and Carter was third as far as NFL career. Yeah. I mean, but like what did those teams have back then? Depth of talent, right? You can lose Jerome Bettis and you can lose Reggie Brooks and go out the next year and replace them with Lee Becton and Ray Zellers. Like that's where Notre Dame was back then. You could lose Tom Carter and not miss a beat because you just moved Bobby Taylor from safety to corner that next year, 93. And that's where Notre Dame is now, Bryan, is it used to be, and I've made this point, the reason Notre Dame was able to beat Miami, like the only team that could really beat Miami back in the 80s was Notre Dame. And you look at from 87, 88, from 87 to 80 to 90, Miami won 3 titles. 91. It was 87, 89, and 91, correct? They won titles. The 2 years they didn't win a title are years that they lost to Notre Dame, 88 and 90. And the reason Notre Dame could have more success against them than everybody else is because what the misconception about Notre Dame is they had these big, tough guys. You know, you had Andy Heck and Chris Zorich and Wes Pritchett and Michael Stonebreaker and Andre Jones and George Williams and Jeff Alm. And they did have those things. But the difference was those Notre Dame teams could run with Miami. You had Rocket. You had Ricky Waters. You had Stance Magala who could fly. You had Ty Light. You had Pat Terrell, who was a second-round NFL draft pick. You had Anthony Johnson, Rodney Culver. I mean, you had 5 running backs that were drafted. You were so loaded at running back that Dorsey Levens couldn't get on the field. And Reggie Brooks got moved to corner as a freshman. You know, like that was different about those Notre Dame teams is they could run with the elite teams. They're getting there now. They're there in the secondary. They're there at running back. They're not there yet at receiver without the portal. They need the portal to bring in the Will Paulings and the Malachi Fields. That's where recruiting has got to get better. But right now, Notre Dame athletically at running back, linebacker, and in the secondary, they can run with anyone. And I think that's one of the biggest changes we've seen is Notre Dame doesn't need the try-hard smart kids anymore, or they're not trying to win with the try-hard smart kids. They're now winning also because they have try-hard smart kids who can freaking run. That's the difference.
Yeah, Notre Dame's speed on defense is really good. And in some ways, it's improved on offense, too. I mean, Faison is not much fun to tackle in space. Obviously, Love kind of speaks for himself. Really, the running back room in general is fast. And they've also got some nice pieces in terms like Kedron Young will come along. They'll be fine there. But they just have guys that make plays with their feet that have nothing to do with coaching. At the very top of the board in college football, it's different. Like, I know, like, nobody likes hearing the name Jeremiah Smith, but, like, he's still one of the best high school players I've ever seen. He ran over 23 mile an hour last year, like in a practice. And he's 215 pounds. I don't have to be a great coach to figure that out.
Well,
you know?
Leonard Moore, Jeremiah Love, like, you watch Leonard Moore. What did Quinshon Junkins run at the pro? They didn't run like a high 4.4. Like Leonard Moore chased him down with ease, like it was nothing.
Leonard Moore is going to end up being a 4.38 guy, 4.37 guy at the combine.
Jeremiah Love has elite speed. Jadarian Price has elite speed. That's the thing, Brian, is you have guys who can flat out run. Your linebackers can run. I mean, Jalen Sneed, you got to be more instinctive. He can run. Jaden Alsbury can run. Drake Bone can run. Kingston can run. Madden Faremo can run. Bodie Cahoon can run. Like, it's to me, that's what gets them there. Let me ask you this, Brian. Let me put it this way. Do you have a sense of what you would say right now are, you, in your opinion, the top 5 rosters in college football right now? Do you think Notre Dame is in that? I guess you don't need to name all 5, but do you think Notre Dame is in that discussion now? Because you and I have always said they were smart, they were older, they had great O-lines, but they weren't always one of the top 5 most talented teams. Do you think now Notre Dame, when you just look at the entire roster, just talent, that Notre Dame has one of the 5 best rosters in college football? Because I do.
I would say so. I mean, it depends on how you want to evaluate it, but because of the quarterback position, I'll just give you an example. Like, if you take quarterback out of it, Alabama's probably top 3. But I still don't like their quarterback situation, makes me a little nervous. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if Bama's top 5 because of that. Now, next year they will be. The kid they brought in from Duncanville, I think, will eventually win that job.
Keelan Russell.
Yeah, he does not suck. But this year, they're probably out of it. I would say Penn State retained really well. Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, those 4. Then there's a battle for that 5th spot.
Like with Oregon and Georgia.
Yeah. Oregon lost a ton. Like they lost like 6 DBs that are kids. So it's really hard to pick one. But their quarterback room is really close to like Notre Dame, like Dante Moore and Austin Novosad, et cetera. They got some good quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. So they might be that 15. But again, there's a handful that are right on that edge. Notre Dame's just the most consistent, though.
Right. Because what it's kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning. Oregon's only in this conversation because they went out and got a bunch of transfers to replace guys they lost. Like, Notre Dame hasn't had to do that completely. Now, to a degree, receiver, if you take away Malachi Fields and Will Pauling, I'm a lot more concerned about, does Notre Dame have the entire receiving core to compete?
Right.
We got Faison and Greathouse, but after that.
Yeah, Malachi is also a very specific piece because he's massive. Right. Having a boundary receiver is a luxury for a lot of teams. It's not a given.
Right. Who actually was one of the few guys to actually beat the starting secondary last year outside.
Yeah, he had a couple nice catches against Notre Dame.
Right.
So, yeah.
So they're not – that's why I say they're not completely there yet from a recruiting standpoint. But that also shows where things have changed in Notre Dame too, Brian, because we were uncertain how Notre Dame would be as an institution, allowing the coaches to go out there and get the Riley Leonards and the Malachi Fields and the Devontae Smiths. Like, we knew they were going to let them bring in the Rod Herds from Northwestern and guys like that were graduates and masters. But would they let them go get a kid that graduated from Alabama, like Devontae Smith? Would they let them go get, a kid that played at Clemson, like Bo Collins? Would they let them go get a kid that played at Florida International, like Chris Mitchell, or Marshall, like Jaden Harrison? That was a legitimate question. Virginia would have been one because that's a great academic school. But those are the things, Brian, that you look at and say Notre Dame's willingness as an institution to be supportive of going into the portal to make sure you bring in the right guys. But like, they just got a D tackle from Louisville. That is a whole different universe as an institution than what Notre Dame is. But graduated and they brought him in. I think the portal has been a huge benefit to Notre Dame because it has allowed them to supplement some of those positions where high school recruiting is not there, or maybe development for certain players has not been there. I do think the portal has been a huge positive for Notre Dame because, like, the quarterback room now, very talented, it wasn't ready to lead them to a championship run last year. You needed that portal quarterback last year. You didn't need it this year. You don't need portal running backs this year. You need portal receivers. And you needed a portal D in the previous 2 years. You didn't this year. But you needed a portal D tackle, which you didn't need a portal D tackle last year. So I think the only position right now that's still sort of a portal every year position is nickel. And they're still trying to change that with Carson Hobbs and Ben Minnick and then obviously potentially Dallas Golden. But I think overall, I don't know if Notre Dame is definitively, without a doubt, a top 5 roster right now if they weren't able to tap into the portal in the way that they were. I think they are one of those schools, and you talk about the stability. I don't know of a single program that's not going to the portal at all right now.
Yeah, even Clemson, they
right.
took a couple
like
of
5.
guys.
They just picked up another one. They've got like 5, I think, now.
Good for them.
Right. But they're doing it the way that you need to do it, the way Ohio State did it. Everybody talks about Ohio State buying their roster last year. They didn't add a whole lot of players. Most of their money went to keeping JT in college and making Jack Sawyer. And, they got Junkins, they got the quarterback, they got a couple offensive linemen, Caleb Downs, and a D lineman. They didn't get a whole lot of portal guys, just like Notre Dame. They didn't get a whole lot of portal guys, but the ones they got were impactful. And I think that's the proper way to engage in the portal right now for teams that are established. Some teams have to go there initially because you inherit Brian Kelly would not have been able to field a football team his first 2 years at LSU if he couldn't go to the portal. Had 30-some guys on his roster.
LSU has always been a program with a lot of mercenaries, so he walked into a pretty tough situation.
But that's where it's like, okay, it's understandable to go a heavy emphasis on the portal at some places.
He has to.
Notre Dame is not that right now, but they are smart with it, and that's allowed them to get some of those positions in line with everything else. If they can start recruiting at the high school level at those positions more effectively, that's when I think Notre Dame takes that, gets that final jump where it's just like every year, just like, okay, well, I know they're going to be in the Final Four. Who else is going to be in there with them? I think that's where Notre Dame's – they're much closer to that, Brian, because that's where you and I were when we were kids, right? I mean, it's like, okay, it's going to be Notre Dame and Miami pretty much in the top 4 every year. Who else is going to be it this year? One year it's Georgia Tech, one year it's Penn State, one year it's Colorado. But it was always those 2 teams were kind of always there. Florida State was always going to be somewhere in the top 5, but they couldn't beat Miami. And that's where it just kind of was. You knew that Notre Dame by the end of the season was going to be in the conversation for a national championship. That's just kind of how it was every year. You just assumed it was going to be the case. They're closer to that than they've ever been. And that's what I think makes this season really important. So, like, a couple things, Brian, I want to ask you. When you look at, and we've talked about, their program where they've made a jump. Last thing for me in this segment is, in your opinion, looking at this team, where are the areas that you think there still needs to be more consistent production, recruiting, and or development to kind of take that final step to where you feel like Notre Dame can not only get to the title game, but can go out there where you're just not assuming they're going to lose. What a great run. You're probably going to lose unless that other team turns the ball over 5 times. What do you think are those areas where there's still that remaining area where the gap still has to be closed?
D tackle, I need to see more elite players. And this is something I'm not going to dive into it. If you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com, you can see all the hand-wringing over that all you want there and everywhere else on a Notre Dame message board for that matter. Elite defensive tackles, you got to pay $1 million for. And Notre Dame doesn't really want to do that. That's a really rough subject. You need them, but they don't. Rocking a hard place. The other is ironic because I think it's about to be solved. But again, kind of like your point with the gap closing, they need to have it shown on the field is quarterback. Like I think that Denbrock's going to turn either Kenny or CJ loose, perhaps both, however it ends up working out. But if they come out, let's say they go 3-0, I forget who they play in between Miami and A&M, but it's not anybody good.
Nobody. They have a bye.
Oh, they got to
play Miami, bye, A&M, then it's Purdue, Arkansas, Boise State.
If they start 2-0 and they throw for 250 in each of those games, and it's a little bit of dynamic. I mean, Jeremiah, there'll be at least one play from Jeremiah every game he's healthy that you're like, oh, Notre Dame is cool. But at the same time, if they show they can throw it around against 2 teams that have NFL defensive players, the perception of the quarterback position as well as the receiver position will completely change. There's no way around it. You have to do that. Now, if they go out and win those games and throw for $150 in each of them, you regress. I know Freeman's not concerned about that, but just as a program, I know how recruits, that's my world. They want to see it. And receivers are by far the biggest defense. It's not even competitive. There is not a 5th place to it. So if you're not throwing it around, you're not getting them.
You got to forget what position I coached most of my college career.
Trust
me, I know this. Yeah. I know this. At any level of football, they're the biggest divas. There's 100%. No doubt.
So
There's
I
no
think
doubt.
that's the two spots in addition to defensive line that you just need to see. Now they just developed. Well, I don't remember what Riley was. He was a 4-star, I think, pretty much across the board, but he was in a 5. They just don't get guys like
Yeah, he was
him.
like a top 150-ish kind of guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they just don't get the elite D tackles. But like once they got CJ, that kind of changed the program a little bit because he obviously could have went to Michigan or whatever.
Could have gone anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, he was really, really good. And it'd been a while. So Minchie was kind of highly rated, but he came on late. They just hadn't done well with high school quarterback recruiting. And the ones that they did get, like Buckner, just didn't work out in the way
Right.
we thought they
Dracovic.
were.
Right.
So for whatever reason, I mean, Clausen was unbelievable. But like, if you had the third year of Jimmy Clausen this upcoming season, Notre Dame would win the national title going away.
Well,
But
the frustrating thing is, Brian, is the highly ranked guys they've had have all regressed.
well,
You know,
they
Dane Chris regressed. Everett Goldman regressed.
yeah,
Malik had the injury. Deshaun Kaiser regressed. Phil Dracovic never got that shot. But even then, when he went to BC, he regressed. I mean, we saw the same thing from him there. He regressed. They're just the only guy that – well, even Ian Book regressed. I mean, his best year was still his first year. 2018 was still Ian Book's best year. And he was better in 19 than he was in 20. There just hasn't been that combination of talent and development that we've seen – since Charlie was here, really, where you saw quarterbacks kind of get better every year. And that's something that I still think that is still a question mark for this coaching staff. Like, I love the fact that they're making this move to the younger, more talented quarterbacks. But Gino Guidugli still has to show us he can develop those young quarterbacks into being championship caliber
100%.
players. He did a great job the last 2 years, especially last year, getting in a portal quarterback and then, implementing him into what they're doing. But that's different. Duke developed Riley Leonard. You just had to top it off. Wake Forest developed, Sam Hartman. These kids, I mean, Kenny, it was coached by Tommy Reese for a year. Last 2 at Gino. Actually, no, he wasn't. He was committed to Tommy. He never played for Tommy.
That's right.
He was only here in 23. Steve played for Tommy for a year. But CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie are Gino Guidugli only guys. So if they are good, then we can now look at Gino Guidugli and say, box check, they can develop quarterbacks, something they haven't done in a long time. I mean, the only guy they truly, quote unquote, developed that really just played his whole career was your probably least talented quarterback of the previous decade. And Ian Book. Physically talented. And Ian Book, that's a problem.
Yeah, I think that they'll take another step as a program in terms of recruiting perception, specifically at receiver, if quarterback works out this year. If they even go 10-2, go to the playoff and win a playoff game and they throw it around, it would probably change the program in a lot of ways more than what they did last year, as goofy as that may sound, because receivers want to know if they're going to the NFL.
Well, the other thing too, Brian, is what's been wild this spring is after what we've seen at quarterback in recent years, this spring, Notre Dame hosted Peyton Houston. And if you guys have not seen him, that's one of the best arms you're ever going to watch for a sophomore in high school. I know he's only 5'10", but that kid has a phenomenal arm. It reminds me so much of Everett, at an older Everett. They've hosted Malachi Ziegler. They've hosted Trey Taylor. And they've hosted Peter Bork. So, like, elite quarterbacks on their own dime visited this spring. So, like, there's clearly that interest in the program. I think, Brian, you're spot on that if they can go out there and throw the ball, they don't have to throw for 400 yards a game or 300 yards a game.
250 is fine.
230 to 250 on a regular basis. And when it's 230, it's because you didn't throw in the fourth quarter. That, that's where it's at. Show that you're a balanced football team. You're going to get receivers, obviously, but it's there. It also then sets you up too, because it's great that you have Kenny and CJ, but what about when they're gone? Well, you get Noah Blake Hebert in 25, the 25 class, which was huge. To lose a guy like Deuce Knight and replace him with a guy like Blake Hebert, you flip from Clemson. You've got a talented top 100 caliber kid in Noah Grubbs in 26. And then you've got some of these really elite quarterbacks in 2027. It not only helps your receiver recruiting, it also helps your quarterback recruiting so you can keep this sucker going, because here's the thing. If you prove that you can turn quarterbacks into big-time players, they will be more willing to stay an extra year to wait their turn than they will maybe if they don't believe that you really have the track record. Like, why would I sit here and be a backup for a coaching staff that hasn't proven that they can develop me into a top pick? I'm just going to go over here and play for this guy who has. But when you start establishing that you can produce big-time quarterbacks, okay, I'll wait till my redshirt sophomore year because I know I'm going to get 2 years of shine and I'm going to be a top 10 draft pick. Like, that is huge, not just for recruiting, but then also for retention. That's how you really get good at retention, Bryan, because they know, hey, look, I'll wait a year at corner to get coached by. I'll wait a year to get coached by Mike Mickens because I know when my time comes, I'm going to get developed like nowhere else and then still go be able to do my thing. And that's a huge part of this thing for Notre Dame, and that is an area where I think quarterback is key. Huge.
Well, I think the same thing already happened. We talked about earlier with corner. There are a few guys however they got them. Once they did, they couldn't miss because you may not get. I remember watching Benjamin Morrison. When you told me about it, I went and watched the film. I'm like, this is the best guy in the class. And then they maximized it, though.
Right.
They weren't afraid to freaking play. What did he start? Game 2 or game 3
Well,
this freshman?
He played in game 1, though.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like,
right.
We know he's good. How many guys would play a freshman like corner? There's just
against Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka in game 1. Correct. Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he went out there and was a player, and you're like, okay, yeah, Egbuka, if I remember, did okay, but Marvin only had like 30-some yards until the end or something like that.
Marvin had less than 100 yards combined in the 2 games he played against Benjamin Morrison.
That's what I'm saying. Like, Benjamin Morrison was great, and he wasn't even an upperclassman yet. So, again, Notre Dame's program, if the cornerback situation is taken care of, I think the DN spot will be this year, obviously, having Bryce. We haven't talked about him today. Certainly helps. But, like, Burnham's good. I think Tuialamaka is pretty good. And I think Boubacar is the most talented of the group as just a pass rusher. If he's healthy, I have no idea if he will be. That's going to be easier to recruit, too. And we haven't even talked about that. We'll talk about that in a week or two. But, like, D-line recruiting has completely changed at Notre Dame. That's all I'll say on it today. But they focused on it more, which is good. But they're just doing a better job. And I think some of the kids realize, okay, it's cool to play defense at Notre Dame. Last year helped Notre Dame. They got a lot of publicity.
Yeah.
That helps recruiting too, because sometimes your most important recruiter is just what's going across ESPN and Fox and all that. That's just the way that is.
I mean, Bryan, in 2023, the defense was very good. Like, they had a top 5 to 10 defense in 2023, but the team wasn't that great. Yep. And so people didn't pay attention outside of, wow, did you see what they did to Caleb Williams? And you know, obviously they got some respect for what they did against Ohio State, but when the team's not that good, the difference this year is they played just as well, if not slightly better on defense this year, but I'd say about similarly statistically, very similar. The difference is because the team was better, people paid more attention to it. Now they're like, well, okay, Notre Dame is now strong a few defensive years in a row together where they're a big-time defense. And they're doing it with skill players. It's like your best players are DBs and linebackers, not D linemen. And so I think that's had a big impact. And again, if you can then raise your level of play on the D line, or recruiting, which they have. I mean, they did get Boubacar, they did get Logan Thomas, they did get Bryce Young, they did get the current class. They're getting to that point. I think D tackle is that final piece where I want to see them really raise their game to get more of the top 100-ish type of players, the Tiki Holas, the Kerry Wilders, the guys like that I think have sort of those higher ceilings. Get more of those guys. That's kind of that final piece on defense from a recruiting standpoint but they're in a position to potentially do that in this class.
Yeah. I also think that when they do miss, or if a guy turns pro early, because they're so good with retention at other spots and you have to go buy a kid in the portal, they can overspend at defensive tackle if they have to.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I have zero idea what Notre Dame got for Jared Dawson. Like, they probably had to spend some money because he had opportunities. He was pretty good in the blue gold game. Yeah. Now, I know he's not the most consistent guy, but when he wants to go, his first step is ridiculous.
The great thing is, because of the depth there, though, you don't need him to play 50 snaps a game.
He can play 28 to 32
and be really good. Right, exactly. Anywhere else, Bryan, that you look at and say, is it just they're close enough to now? It's like now you just – like, I think the big thing that changed about the perception for Notre Dame this year, Bryan, that's different from what they did in 2012 and 2018 and 2020 is in those years, Notre Dame was kind of considered like that blue-collar team, that team that just was very well coached, and they just had a couple stud players, and then they'd get to the big stage and they just get outclassed a little bit, And I think the thing that changed so much this year was the fact that they got to that stage and they proved that they did have to go down to New Orleans and play Georgia and beat them where they were clearly the better team for 60 minutes, where they had to play Penn State and go toe-to-toe with the team that a lot of people hype up every year as a top 5 team, and great back and forth game, and you go out and make those plays. And who was making the plays in that game? It wasn't, oh, did you see that big sack by Stephon Tuitt or that great tackle for loss? No, it was holy Jaden Greathouse. Oh, did you see that move that Kedron Young put on that guy outside? Did you look at that coverage play by Christian Gray? Did you see that insane back shoulder catch that it was the skill players that were really going out there and saying, hey, anything you can do, I can do better type of thing. And obviously the Ohio State game didn't turn around, but I do think the way they finished that game sort of salvaged the season a little bit, because it was on the verge of, they keep getting blown out by Ohio State. It's like, nothing's really changed. But I think the way that they went out that second half and just started making some just great plays, Jaden Greathouse going off and things like that, I think at least said, okay, they're better than us, but we're closer than we were when we just got annihilated by Clemson in 2020 or Bama in 2020 and Clemson in 2018 and Bama in 2020 and 2012. I think Ohio State in 2005, LSU in 2006, USC in 05 and 06. That I think has changed too, where now you can look and say, well, Notre Dame's hasn't closed. They're not closing the gap on Georgia. They've closed it. It's like its gap's closed. You could even argue that Notre Dame's got a better roster now than Georgia. Notre Dame and Penn State. Now you can't say, well, Penn State, you're now chasing Ohio State. That's really where it is. You're still trying to chase that team, and you're trying to chase that ring. That's the big difference. And I think now that you have some of those wins that you can point to, I think that's changed the narrative from a recruiting standpoint with Notre Dame as well, because it's not a coincidence that the 2 stud big time top 50 players they got at the end both had Georgia legitimately in their top 5, meaning Georgia would have taken those guys if they wanted to go to Georgia.
That matters. At some point, you got to beat teams that it's really hard to beat in their backyard for D linemen. And where I live is where all the D linemen are. Okay. They're just not up north that much. So they figured that out. And like you mentioned it earlier, they've got guys on the staff that actually enjoy recruiting. You can't be forced into it because kids will know.
Yeah.
And then you lose. Those guys get smoked on the recruiting trail. John Tenutas of the world. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Bryan, we're going to get on to some Miami stuff, and I'm going to give you a chance to just kind of close out this section a little bit with whatever you feel like adding about this conversation. But for those that are just joining the show, we spent the first 39 minutes breaking down the decision by Steve Angeli to transfer from Notre Dame. So I've seen our numbers jump up here in the last 20 minutes or so. So we have already talked about Steve Angeli. We may have some time for a mailbag at the end of the show. So if you guys have some questions that you want to ask Bryan or I about Notre Dame, college football, recruiting, whatever, you can go ahead and start getting those in there. Just put an MB on there or a mailback emoji if you want to have some questions about the quarterback situation, whatever the case may be. Go and throw those in there, and Bryan and I, if we have some time at the end of the show, we'll answer those. If Bryan has to run at some point in time, I'll finish answering those. But you can go ahead and get those in there now. But if you are wanting to hear what we said about Steve Angeli, I commented on it. Bryan commented on it. Trevor Trobers was with us during that segment of the show. Trevor commented on it as well. You can go back to the very beginning of the show. That is what we kicked things off with. We talked for about 39 and a half minutes about that topic before we moved on to this, which was getting Bryan's opinion on, where does Notre Dame stack? Because the reason I liked hearing from you, Bryan, is because you're not the typical and I think this is part of the reason you and I have gotten along so well over the years, is because we're both willing to call it like we see it. We're not just like, let's cover for Notre Dame. And if anything, I think you're even more critical than I am with certain things. And so when you and I are like, dude, this roster is legit, it's like, take notice. And so when you and I were talking about it, and I'm hearing you say the things that you're saying, I'm like, sometimes I almost call you, because I'm like, I'm feeling too good about this right now. Let me just make sure that I'm not, since I'm in this world now, let me call Bryan and maybe, then get just a different opinion. Cause like maybe I'm, since I am so into the Notre Dame world where Bryan's kind of doing everything, it'll help. And so when we're both talking about this is loaded and that's loaded and this is great and this isn't like it's been since the Holt standard, or recruiting hasn't been like this since Vinny was running recruiting. When you start having those conversations with us, it's like, okay, it's a fun time. It's a fun time to be alive. There's no doubt about it. So before we move on to the Miami stuff, Bryan, because we are going to talk about Miami, any last comments that you want to make about this notion of, is Notre Dame an elite program roster wise? Is Notre Dame in a situation where they are now more capable of going toe to toe with the best teams, where you're not like, God, I hope they don't get Bama in this draw. Man, I hope they don't have to play Georgia. And I hope that somebody else knocks off Georgia. Your thoughts about that as we wrap this up.
To put it this way, I would like Notre Dame to draw Georgia in the first round this next year. They don't have a quarterback right now. I'm not trying to be mean, but like one of my buddies is really tied in with the Georgia program. And I said, well, if that's their quarterback, they're in trouble. I said, do they got anybody else? And he said, the Puglisi kid throws interceptions right and left.
He does.
He's
got a really live arm.
Yeah, he does. But from what I'm told, he can't read a coverage.
He can't. He's athletic. He's got a really live arm.
If you can't read a coverage, all that stuff goes out
to learn. Yeah, he's just not ready yet. I like Gunnar Stockton, but Gunnar's a gamer. Gunner's the kind of kid you can win a title with if you have their 21 and 22 rosters.
They don't have that.
They don't have that, Bryan. They don't.
Their depth is gone because they all hit the portal to go get cashed in at Missouri or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, that's another point. One of the advantages Notre Dame had, I didn't see this coming, by the way, so I'm not going to claim it. Notre Dame has won in the portal area because other teams have come back to the pack because you can't hide 5 stars through their junior year than they start as a senior.
Mm-hmm.
Kids didn't want to sit out the year.
And it's not that Notre Dame is getting those kids. It's just they're just not being stashed at Bama like they used to.
Yeah, they're spread out everywhere, and that's why teams like Vanderbilt can win. That's why teams like Ole Miss, I think, will be a top 10 program for quite a while, as long as Lane is there, because he's good at mixing the portal in high school. They wouldn't be that way without the portal. There's no way.
Yeah.
But so I think Notre Dame, roster-wise, they're a top 5 program. They have the ability starting this year, because I think CJ will win the job. I think most people believe that. But whatever happens, either one of them, even if Kenny was the starter for whatever reason, I think Notre Dame would be in the playoff.
Yeah, that's a bit. I mean, he's still – if it was – I'll say that. I've said this before, Bryan. I'm going to say this, and I want to get your thoughts on it because I don't know that you believe this. So I'm going to say it, and you comment on it. The comment I've made is I don't really care who starts between CJ and Kenny. Like, whoever wins the job, I'm good with. Because in my view, I've also been honest. I think CJ's the most gifted player. He's a 5-star recruit in my eyes. I mean, you've seen him throw live. John Garcia's thrown him throw live, and you're like, y'all don't understand it. You don't appreciate CJ Carr until you see him in person, because the balls. My wife, Bryan, Angela even texted me in the game. She goes, it's funny. She's like, it sounds different when CJ throws it. It just, when the receivers catch it, it just has more of a thwop when he throws it compared to the other quarterbacks. Like, you just have to see it to really appreciate it. It's the first time I had Vince D'Addario come to a practice last year where it was his first chance seeing Kenny and CJ throwing. And it was funny because it was Kenny and CJ side by side, and then it was Steve and Riley Leonard down here. And they're just working on 3-step, just throwing it, 10 yards down the field, 45-degree angle. And I was like, all right, Vince, what do you think? And he looks at me, goes, it looks a whole lot different going that way than it does coming back this way. But I still say, if it wasn't for CJ's presence, Notre Dame fans would be really excited about Kenny Minchie emerging at quarterback. That's what's exciting about it. That's my opinion. I'm curious what you think about that, because I know we're on the same page about CJ, but I'm curious about your thoughts on Kenny.
I think Kenny would be more up and down, but he would give you a few more wow plays because of his feet. I think the consistency will be there with CJ, and based on this, just coincidence, but based on the roster they have, especially a ridiculous running back room, you're going to have to play single high a lot. He can make seam throws that most guys can't. He's proven that he can throw the sideline patterns. It's like, was it Larson? Whoever that first throw.
The first one was Bauman. Second was Larson. Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Like those are throws most quarterback coach be like, don't make that. That's too much of a risk. Well, I don't know what you say to CJ there. If you're, I'm not really sure you can say anything. You just kind of go on to the next play. But
that's why you recruited him, because he can make those throws.
So
and you live with the occasional pick because the next 5 are going to be on the money.
If Notre Dame's receivers take this even a small step forward this year, and again, you're looking at the receivers they had, plus you're averaging, I don't know, a little bit more, I would think, this year, because they should be healthier at tight end, a little bit of more production there, and you're adding Malachi, the passing game is going to be really hard you're going to have to play somebody extra in the box.
Yeah. Well,
So good luck.
Bruce Feldman in his freaks list last year had both Malachi and Will Pauling in his freaks list. I think Malachi had like a 40-inch vertical and had crazy numbers and crazy bench. And Will Pauling, he said, had like, I think a 38, 40-inch vertical. And at Wisconsin had run a 4.38, something like that. Like that's your two portal additions.
And Pauling's not even going to start, is he?
Right. Possibly. I mean, it's him and Faison there. Possibly.
Play
He
a lot
played for
better.
Mike Brown at Cincinnati and for a year at Wisconsin. So he's a little bit different from some of the other transfers because the coach knows him more. He's actually coached Will Pauling longer than he coached Jordan Faison. So, but it doesn't matter who starts; they're both going to play because he can play outside and slot, and so can Faison, and so can Greathouse. So they're all three going to play. But like you just added a 4.3 something guy who's played in the Big Ten, had 100+ yards receiving against LSU 2 years ago in a bowl game, who had 8 catches against Bama and a touchdown against Bama this year. I mean, it's just a little bit different. That you're adding that to the mix, and yeah, I'm excited about it. Well, Brian, we're going to move on to some Miami talk again, folks. If you want to get some questions in for Brian or I, go ahead and put an MB on there. So I'm going to give you an example. Right there is a question from Sly Fox. You see that MB? Then he asks his question. We'll address that at the end of the show, or you can put a mailbox emoji on there as well, and then we will answer it that way. And, of course, if you want to get it moved to the top of the board, then you go ahead and throw in a super chat, and we'll answer those super chat questions too. But we're going to get on here now to Miami next. But before we do, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. But the best way to support us, as always, and you can get Brian's comments, and he gives in his feeling. I gave Brian a Compton membership. Dude, post whenever you want. He posts his videos from his show. We just kind of went through how to do that, so he's going to post those more often on our channel as well. So you don't have to keep going searching for it. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.